Okay, so today we're going to finish 11.5, and we're going to go over the secant and the cosecant. So the secant of theta is the reciprocal of the cosine. So it's related to 1 over the cosine of theta. And the secant is undefined where the cosine is equal to 0. So we have those undefined places where you have 0 because if you do 1 divided by 0, it's undefined. Okay, and then that means at that point there will be a, and they'll be vertical. Okay, so the only asymptotes you have on these graphs are vertical asymptotes. And secant has the same period as the cosine, which is what? What's the period of the cosine function? 2 pi. Yep, and we are going to find it with 2 pi over b. The parent function has the period of 2 pi. Okay, and then sine and the cosecant have a similar relationship where wherever the sine is 0, those are where the vertical asymptotes are going to occur. Okay, now if we already looked at this graph, you may have noticed the curves here. We're going to go ahead and outline those. So the part you're actually going to graph, it's not going to be this highlighted portion. This is just the cosine of x. This here is the sine of x. And we're going to show how these are related because the cosecant is 1 over the sine, the secant is 1 over the cosine. And when you graph these, you're going to be graphing only the U-shaped parts, and yes, they do look like parabolas. They are. Okay, they are U-shaped. Okay, and they keep repeating. So you have an upward parabola, a downward parabola, and then an upward, then a downward. So those are going to keep repeating. Same thing here. So you have an upward parabola and a downward parabola. They just occur at different places depending on your function. Now you can see the arrows go up, okay, to infinity, down to negative infinity. So because there's no absolute maxima and minima, the amplitude is undefined. Okay, so in these, they're not going to ask you for the amplitude because there isn't one. So that's very similar to what other functions that we've studied. Yep, tangent and cotangent. So the A value does affect the local maxima and the local minima values. So we're still going to be using the A value. It's just going to be in terms of our local min and our local max. So if you're looking at your values here, okay, the maximum of the cosine becomes the minimum of that parabola. The minimum of the cosine becomes the maximum of that parabola. So we have these values that occur at the mins and the maxes of sine and cosine. And so we're going to be using that to help us when we graph. Okay, so we're going to go over a few things from our functions. Okay, so when we were graphing the cosine, we're going to make a 3-column graph. So keep that column there. We're going to do the same thing over here. So we're going to have x. We're going to have the sine of x. Okay, and then based on this, we're going to do the secant. And based on this, we're going to do the cosecant. All right, so if the period is 2 pi, remember, we start at 0, we end at 2 pi. Halfway is pi over 2, halfway is 3 pi over 2. Now this is cosine. So remember for cosine at 0, what point are you at? Yep, you're at the max, so that's 1. If you start at the max, you end at the max. Okay, and halfway is the mid. Okay, and then halfway between those are 0. Okay, so when we calculate the secant, remember secant is 1 over the cosine. So if you do 1 divided by 1, what do you get? 1. You do 1 divided by 0. What's 1 divided by 0? Yeah, undefined, right? You can't divide by 0, so that's undefined. 1 divided by negative 1. Negative 1. So anytime it's 0, you can't divide by that. It's going to be undefined. Okay, and then 1 divided by itself is going to be 1. If you have something that's undefined, look at your graph. So at pi over 2, which is right here, you have an asymptote there. Okay, and then we have another asymptote at 3 pi over 2. And then that pattern continues. So just like we did with our sine and our cosine, we are going to have 5 points on our table. Okay, and then I want you guys to fill in the table for x, sine of x, and the cosine. Okay, so use your other graph as a model. So your x values are going to be the same. All right, so for the sine, at 0, you're at 0. You start at 0, you end at 0. Halfway is 0. Halfway between those is the max, halfway between those is the min. So when you go to calculate the cosecant, remember, it's just 1 divided by the sine. So 1 divided by 0 is undefined. So anywhere there's a 0, you can go ahead and put the undefined. Okay, and then 1 divided by itself is 1. 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. And if you look at your chart, those are going to match your points that are already graphed for you. Okay, so they put the cosine and the sine in there to show how it's related, and I think that's really helpful. When you are graphing though, you do not have to put the sine and the cosine in the function. Okay. All right, so one thing you are going to be asked to find is the period, which is just 2 pi divided by v. And then any place that is undefined is going to be a vertical asymptote. So any place that's undefined is going to be a vertical asymptote. Okay, and this occurs when the sine of x or the cosine of x is equal to 0. So the asymptotes occur when the sine of x or the cosine of x is equal to 0. Like we just saw, right? If you're dividing by 0, that's going to give you something that's undefined. The undefined places are where the vertical asymptotes are going to occur. Okay, so if you look here, do you see how the maximum of your cosine value is going to create the minimum value of your parabola? Okay, so what you're going to use is your A value. Okay, the A value is going to be the minimum of this parabola. Okay, so that occurs where the sine of x equals 1 or the cosine of x equals 1. Okay, and that's because if this is 1, you just multiply it by the a value. Okay, and then the opposite of a is going to be the maximum of your parabola. And that occurs where the sine of x equals -1 or the cosine of x equals 1. Oh, sorry, -1, please. Okay, so the opposite is where you're going to reach those minimum values here, and these minimum values on sine and cosine end up being the maximum value of your parabola. Okay, so we're going to use those parent functions as a guide to graph our function, and we are going to identify the period and make a table with 5 values. Okay, I'm going to show you a few different ways that you can make your table. Okay, and for your homework tonight, that's all you'll need is you'll need the 5 values in the graph with the period, and then your graph just has to have the asymptotes and the parabola on it. Okay, so we still want to know what our a value is and our b value. So the a value is always in front of the function, the b value is in front of x. Okay, so the a value is 1/2 and the b value is 1/2. So the first thing we're going to do is find the period. And we know the period is equal to 2 pi over b. So 2 pi divided by 1/2 is, what's 2 pi divided by half? 4 pi, because you're just multiplying by 2, right? Okay, so that's going to be your period. And then if you want to go to your table after that, you can. Because we are doing something similar to what we did with sine and cosine, right? So you start at 0. We aren't doing any phase shifts, so we're just keeping it simple. Okay, if you start at 0, where do you end? 4 pi. And then you do your halfway, which is 2 pi. And then halfway is pi, halfway here is 3 pi. All right, so we want to know where the asymptotes occur. Okay, so to find the x values, okay, so to find where x is undefined, the x values, the cosine of x equal to 0, and multiply by 1 over b. Okay, obviously when you're doing your homework, you're not going to have to write that, you're just going to do it. Okay, so to find where x is undefined, use the x values that make the cosine of x equal to 0, and then multiply those by 1 over b. And 1 over b just means the reciprocal of b. All right, so let's look back up at our chart. So the cosine of x, where is the cosine of x equal to 0? places on our chart. Where are they? Where's the cosine of x equal to 0? Pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Okay, so you're not sure, they're just right here in your table, right? So at pi over 2, you're at 0. At 3 pi over 2, you're at 0. Okay? And then what's the reciprocal of b? Yep. So we're just going to multiply by 2. Okay? And why are we multiplying by 2? The reciprocal of b. So b is 1/2, you're multiplying by 2. What's pi over 2 times 2? 5. 3 pi over 2 times 2? 3 pi. The 2's cancel, right? So that means you're undefined here and you're undefined here. So now we can put that on our chart. Okay, so at pi undefined, you have an asymptote. Okay, at 3 pi undefined, you have an asymptote. All right, so let's put those on our graph. So what we're doing here is we're just establishing the pattern. Okay, notice that this is labeled for you. That's you. And with your homework, your graphs are going to be labeled, so don't change them. Okay, but it's okay if your chart is, all the points on your chart don't match. It's just going to help you establish your pattern. Okay, so I have 1, 2 units between these, so 1, 2 units here. And what does 2 units represent on this scale? 2 pi. Okay, and our period is 4 pi. So that means for every period, you should have how many asymptotes? Yep. Okay, for every half of a period there. Oh, you can. You can. All right, and then we want to find out where your max values are and where your minimum values are. So remember, your A value of 1/2, that is going to be where the minimum is of your parabola, and that occurs when the sine of x is 1 or the cosine of x is 1. This is the reciprocal of cosine. Okay, so where is the cosine 1? At 0. Okay, so that means this value is going to be 1/2. Okay, that's your A value. So it'll be 1/2 here. And then what's going to happen in the middle? What's the middle going to be? Yep, -1/2. Okay, there's a few different ways that you can find that. Okay, so you can also find where those occur based on multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay, so you can find where the max and the min occur. Okay, so if your A value is 1/2, you know that you are going to have the value of 1/2, which is your minimum. And then you just have to find out where that is. Okay, so if you were to multiply 0 by the reciprocal of b, you get 0. And if you were to multiply 2 pi by the reciprocal of b, you get 4 pi. Okay, so this is where you have A is equal to 1/2. And again, that's because you are just taking where the cosine reaches the max. And you're multiplying by 1 over b. Okay, you don't have to do it this way. I just talked you through how you could think of it. You don't have to write it out. You can just do that part. Okay, and then the min of your parabola. But that was confusing people a little bit today. It's your max of your parabola, and the min of your parabola is the max of the opposite. So like the min of this is the max of your reciprocal function. The max of this is the min of your reciprocal function. So I thought it'd be easier if you can label them. This is your max and your min. Okay, but it is going to reach the minimum value at pi. So if you were to take pi and multiply it by 1 over b, okay, at 2 pi, your y value, or the a is negative 1/2. That's where you do the opposite of a, okay? So this is the min of the cosine of x multiplied by 1 over b. Okay, so whichever way you think is easiest, if you want to use the pattern this way to fill it in, you can. Okay, if you want to look at this table to help you fill it in, you can do that. Okay, and I'm going to show you one more way you can verify if you're unsure with the patterns. So at 0, you're at 1/2, so this is 1, this is a half. So this is going by 2's. So once you put your minimum on there, go ahead and curve both sides up. Okay, and then once you do that, if this is a parabola opening up, your next one has a max of 1/2 and it's opening down. Okay, and then you're going to continue the pattern. So we do have to put half of our parabola here. We'll have a parabola opening down next, and then a parabola opening up. Your parabola should follow your vertical asymptotes, so just double check that. And then your parabolas should never cross the x-axis. Okay, they're always going away from it. Okay, so if you have it crossing that, you're going to have to make some adjustments. Okay, let's say you're unsure if this is 1/2 or negative 1/2. Another thing you can do, which is something I find helpful, is you can just plug in the values. Okay, so you can plug in that x is equal to 0. If you do that, then you have 1/2, the secant of 1/2 times 0. Well, this is just going to be 0. Okay, so we can find the secant at 0 because the secant is the reciprocal of cosine, right? So the secant of 0 is the same thing as 1 divided by the cosine of 0. What's the cosine at 0? It's on your chart. It's 1. Okay? Or you can think of your unit circle. The cosine is always the x value. So if you do 1 divided by 1, right? This is just 1/2 times 1 or 1/2. Okay? If you were plugging in x equals pi, you would do 1/2, the secant of 1/2 times pi. What is 1/2 times pi? Pi over 2. So the secant at pi over 2 is the same thing as 1 over the cosine at pi over 2. So the point at pi over 2 is here. It's 0, 1. So if you have 1 divided by 0, what's that going to be? Undefined. So if you want, you can just plug in the values in your chart, and you can find it using your unit circle. Okay, you can find it that way. All right, so now we're going to graph the cosecant. Okay, so I want you to find the period, and I want you to set up your table. So I'll give you a moment to do that. correct. Okay, so the b value is 1, right? So 2 pi divided by 1 is 2 pi. So now when you're making your table, you start at 0, you end at 2 pi, halfway is pi, half of that. Thanks. 3 pi over 2 and pi over 2. Okay, so we just check yours in a second.
Teachers, at this time, please escort your classes down past 4 corners.
Okay, we're going to finish this.
The bathroom. And begin your lineup on either side of the cafeteria on the way down and out to the student entrance. Thank you.
It's going to take us like 2 minutes. We're going to finish this part of it. So we're going to find where the sign of x is 0 and multiply by 1 over b. Okay, so when you do this, the sign of x is 0 at 0, pi, and 2 pi. And if your b value is 1, you are just going to multiply all of those by 1. Okay, and that means these are where you're undefined. So this is undefined, and this is undefined. Okay, and then if you do not have a negative, then your a value is 2. The opposite is going to be negative 2, and that's where you can fill in your other values. Guys, we're going to graph this. They told us 210. Okay, and then your homework for tonight is going to be those 4 questions on your worksheet, okay? And I just want to remind you that when you're doing your graph, if you ever are unsure about which way to go, it always has to go the opposite direction of your axis. Okay, and then you are going to scale by whatever you want. So I'm scaling mine by 1, so I'm going to be at 2, and I'm going to be at negative 2. Okay, and then here I'm going to be at negative 2 and 2. Alright, so you only have those 4 problems tonight, and then the review we'll work on tomorrow.